All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome back, everyone. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, and around the world on the Starcom Radio Network. Worldwide toll-free, 1-800-610-7035, and if you click extension 0, it brings you right into our broadcast studio. You can always send an email to me on air at xzoneradiotv.com. On all social media sites, X Zone Radio TV, and of course, you can listen to the X Zone 24/7, 365 at www.xzoneradiotv.com. Hey, your internet's not working. You're in an area where you can't pick up a signal and make a call, but you do have access to an old-fashioned landline. Well, you're in luck because you can listen to the X Zone by calling 213-401-0080. That's 213-401-0080. My guest this hour, X Zone Nation, is a gentleman I've had the pleasure and honor of knowing for a great number of years now. His name is Doug ROKKE, Dr. Doug ROKKE. He was also a major in the U.S. Army, and he is a depleted uranium expert. Now, Doug earned his Bachelor of Science in Physics at Western Illinois University, followed by his Master's of Science and his Ph.D. in Physics and Technology education at the University of Illinois. His military career spanned 4 decades to include combat duty during the Vietnam War and Gulf War I. Doug served as a member of the 3rd U.S. Army Medical Command's Nuclear, Biological, and Chemical Teaching, Medical Response, and Special Operations Team, the 3rd U.S. Army Captured Equipment Project Team, and with the 3rd U.S. Army Depleted Uranium Assessment Team during Gulf War I. He was the U.S. Army's Depleted Uranium Project Director from 1994 to 1995, and he developed the congressionally mandated education and training materials and wrote U.S. Army Regulation 700-48, the U.S. Army PAM 700-48, and the U.S. Army's Common Task for Depleted Uranium Instruments. Now, Doug has also taught nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare, hazardous materials, and emergency medicine for over 20 years to both civilian and military personnel. I could go on reading Doug's many qualifications, his certifications, and his experience that he's had. But instead of doing that, why don't we just bring Doug ROKKE on? Doug ROKKE, welcome back to the X Zone. Great having you with us, my friend.
Thanks, Rob. It's been quite a few years since you and I started everything at a Christmas party.
Yeah, that is so true. That is so true. And even today, people ask me if we're going to be bringing you and the cast on at Christmas time because it's turned into a Christmas tradition here.
Yeah, isn't it wonderful? I mean, that is so many years ago, and it did so good and so much stuff, and everybody that's been involved, those kids have gone on to excel in academia and get into real theater. Isn't that wonderful?
It certainly is, Doug, and you've touched so many lives, both in the military and out. You teach kids, and you know what? The experience that you have and the experience you share with your students, with your friends, and those who have the pleasure of meeting you is invaluable, Doug. You're a great guy. Let's put it that way.
Thank you very much. You're making my head bloat. All I'm trying to do is finish a job.
Finish a job that it seems too many people really don't want finished, Doug. They're doing a very good job of trying to avoid the job, and that's the depleted uranium. But before we get to that, Doug, I'd like to talk to you about something that really disturbed me and upset me. Earlier this week, we had a guest on who said that the United States government, the Israelis, and the Saudis created ISIS. Number one. Number 2, then he said that the United States military and the CIA are the world's 2 biggest drug traffickers. How do you feel about those statements, Doug?
I don't even think I can even make a comment about it. I think ISIS is nothing but a response by all the inhabitants of that region.
Yeah.
Western domination that's been going on and on and on without justification. I mean, we invaded their nations, we overthrew their governments, we totally destroyed their economies, contaminated air, water, soil, and food, and now we're sending troops back in again. I mean, we took the Sunnis out and put the Shiites in. Now we're putting the Sunnis back in. At the same time, we're trying to put the Shiites back in. At the same time, we're trying to work for the Kurds. And all we're doing is arming all the groups that hate each other.
Maybe it's a plan so that they eliminate each other.
I don't think so. I think our whole plan is just to get in there what it was from the beginning. We want total control of the oil. I mean, all the resources. That goes back to the Sykes-Picot Treaty in 1916, 1917. Nothing's changed.
Doug, are we any closer to bringing the problem that depleted uranium has caused and taking responsibility for it?
Not really. I mean, I had a discussion a few hours ago with a scientist and an individual over at the Jefferson Proving Ground in Indiana, which is it's northwest of Madison, Indiana, and it's southeast of Indianapolis. And the Army totally contaminated that with DU. They refused to clean it up according to the guidelines and regulations I wrote. You got people sick all over the place. And as he told me a few hours ago, he can't even get any mention of it in the local newspapers because of the shutdown and the blackout of the military. I mean, the DU's been used all over. They're using it continuously. They've shot it all up. Now ISIS has grabbed tanks, our tanks and stuff we gave to the Iraqis with DU in it. And God only knows what other weapons they've got a hold of because we've been sharing it and selling it and buying it and giving it away. And then all the chemical and biological stuff we encountered during Desert Storm has finally come full circle. A little over a month ago, the U.S. Army and Department of Defense finally acknowledged the nerve agent exposures and put together a hotline for anybody that was exposed to nerve agents from Desert Storm to the current time, repeat, the current time, from the residuals left there, to get medical care.
Are the vets getting any better medical care these days, Doug? Or is...
No, they're not. I mean, one of my best friends back in March, and he'd been a hero of the veterans military, all the stuff trying to help with everything. Yep. And he committed suicide after he called the hotline for help, and they failed.
Oh, no.
He put his trust in the senior leadership at the VA, Colonel John Gingrich, who was chief of staff, and they promised they'd give him a medical, they'd give him a wheelchair ramp, and none of it happened. He finally gave up the hope. I mean, and so, it was, what else could you do? He called for help, and the help didn't arrive, and we're seeing that every day. I mean, the suicides in the military is way 23, 24, 25 a day at least. And we've been working with a response team at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and they had like 59 or 60 kids on active duty on suicide watch at a given time.
Holy cow.
They're not getting the medical care. I mean, all the criteria is out there, but nobody shares it. Nobody puts it out. Like the documents I've sent to you, they're all internal confirmed documents confirming the health effects, directing medical care, acknowledging the signs and symptoms, but you can't get anybody to distribute that. And if you go to the veterans organizations and you give them to them, they won't share them. And you get to the Department of Veteran Affairs, either in the United States or in Canada, I can guarantee you they're not going to give them to them. Because I went around and around with the Canadians when we put all this stuff together, and I had them assigned to my staff.
Right. So what's the big problem when it comes to helping our vets?
They can't acknowledge that we got millions of casualties and it's all for nothing, and then it's all friendly fire. It's not an enemy, not a bullet or bomb. We got less than 50,000 total wounded in action. That's actual combat casualties. And we got 2 million U.S. military casualties from all the toxic compounds. And then what we did to the U.S. military, we have done to all the U.S. military spouses and everybody else that came back with cross-contamination and their children. And God hope is what we've done to all these nations. We totally contaminated and destroyed. They're a medical disaster. And then when we destroyed their infrastructure, they don't have any medical infrastructure there at all. I mean, it's been going back as far as I can remember, and I got involved again in the Middle East in 1990.
How are you doing personally, Doug? I know that you have had serious problems.
Well, I finally got a new physician yesterday. They got a new pain management physician in at the Danville VA, and he was really receptive. I'd sent him all the documents ahead of time. I went in with the documents, and him and his staff were all right there acknowledging it and figuring out what we need to do. So it was the first time. We've really been pushing it and everything else. I mean, they're getting rid of VA personnel all over creation, but at the same time, they're not sharing the information. They're not giving the information out to the doctors or the nurses to get care. So unless the soldiers got the information themselves and walks in with it and shoves it where the sun doesn't shine, they don't get the care still. I mean, we've been working with that, and I've had multiple conversations with the new Secretary McDonald's aide, who we've been on the phone multiple times over the last few weeks or two, and trying to make a difference. But still, it's totally broken.
How do we fix it, Doug?
Well, the President of the United States and both the United States and Canada, the Prime Minister, just have to issue the order. You're going to stop this lie and stop deceit. Just take care of everybody without any more argument, without any more saying, you have to prove where it is. For example, Jerry Wheat was in a Bradley firing vehicle, got shot 3 times by 120-millimeter rounds, DU, fired by an Abrams, friendly fire on Desert Storm. I personally went to his commander and issued his medical care, set it all up right after it happened. He never got it. Years later, we were in the hospital together up in Baltimore for the DU medical program, and they were saying there's nothing wrong with us and everybody's sick. They took the DU shrapnel and embedded in a tuber out of Jerry's left shoulder. We were in a meeting, and God bless Chris Hayes and Bernie Sanders. Now we know why Bernie Sanders is so useful to everybody, and he's shaking the roofs apart. He was all there, and Jerry said, ask the guys in charge of this, Dr. McDermott and Dr. Daxon and Cherry and Mikey Kilpatrick, hey guys, why don't you admit the tumor you just got on my shoulder with the DU embedded in the tumor was caused by the DU was embedded in the tumor? And they looked at him and said, Jerry, you've got to prove that. How does some guy that's a post-mailman prove that?
Do me a favor, Doug. For our listeners who may be hearing you for the first time now on the Starcom Radio Network, can you describe to them what depleted uranium, or DU, is?
Yeah, depleted uranium, or DU, is the primary enrichment process from when they make nuclear fuel and make nuclear bombs. When you have all this stuff, you got to say, for example, you put 100 grams of pure uranium into the enrichment process, and what happens is you get 0.6 grams out that's useful for fuel. Out of every 100 grams, you only get 0.6 grams out that's useful for nuclear reactors or bombs. So you've got 99.4 grams per 100 grams of radioactive materials, 238, 234, 235, etc. That's what's called uranium hexafluoride. That's made into DU. Now, DU is made into kinetic energy penetrators were fired by guns and tanks and airplanes and everything else, and it's also made into cluster bombs, the ATOM and the PETOM, which are anti-personnel mines. I mean, think about a softball where the outer shell is uranium and is filled with high explosive. Then you got your cruise missiles and your bunker busters, and you got everything else. Well, if that's not bad enough with the weapons, then what they did is made DU-crete. So you've got a lot of roads being made with DU-crete. So that's the DU fibers put into the road material because it works great. I mean, it's absolutely incredible for building roads. So I've got all kinds of road construction crews that are sick from it, absolutely confirmed, not even a question. Biomedical results confirm it, and it's a disaster. And this all came down to it because DU munitions are so effective in war. The Los Alamos memo, which they gave you, and you've got a copy of, said we must lie on our reports in order to sustain the use of it and avoid all liability. And it's still to this day.
Now, isn't the use of depleted uranium against the United Nations law?
Oh, absolutely. Karen Parker and everybody have ruled that. We've testified in the United Nations here in New York and also in Geneva, Switzerland. There's been conference after conference, declaration after declaration. We've had two of the last popes have made declarations condemning it and offering to help and doing what they can. In the U.S. and England and Australia and Israel and Canada, hey, this stuff is so good, it's better than sliced bread, so they're just going to continue to use it to kill and destroy and sell it all over creation. I read recently that we're selling it to India. This doesn't make any sense at all.
Don't they have their own nuclear reactors in India? Can't they make their own?
They probably could, but again, hey, we got so much munitions, why not give it away with everybody when we sell them the armor? See, that's the crazy thing about all of us arming the Middle East and everybody else. We start sending all the arms to them and sending them all the weapons, and the next thing, they got this best thing. Now we got to build something else to counter that. Well, if we didn't sell it to them to begin with or give it to them to begin with, we wouldn't have to do that.
It's just so crazy, Doug, and over the years, having had you on the show and becoming friends with you, I find it so ironic. I find it so wrong that so many have been and still are suffering from the effects of DU, and it's just being ignored by the powers, by those in power who can actually make the change.
They can't acknowledge it. I mean, it's like all the contamination from the Department of Defense at all these installations. We got horrible contamination here at Chanute Air Force Base in Rantoul, Illinois. They just totally confirm perfluorinated compounds. They got trichloroethylene contaminating the Wisconsin aquifer, which is where all the plants get their water from and the animals drink from and the shallow wells get their water, and they don't care. Then they start taking down the structures, and just like when they blew up the structures, you got all the health effects. So when you've got the copies of that, we've got all the medical programs in place for the military now. We've been forcing that to happen if we can only get them to implement it. But they ignored the same health effects on the civilians caused by their own actions.
It seems that they have congressional hearings on everything and anything. Why hasn't there been a congressional hearing on depleted uranium and its effects on the U.S. military and what it's doing to the lives of the families of those who are affected? Like, something's got to be done, Doug. And you know what? God bless you for all you're doing and all the other people that you are networking with to get this gone. But God, it's been years and years and years, and it seems that you guys are just spinning your wheels.
Yeah, you kind of feel like Don Quixote. I mean, we prepared by request of Chris Shays and Bernie Sanders. We briefed the House of Representatives House Oversight Committee probably 14, 15 years ago, did a full total report. I mean, you go up there and get in the House minutes, and you probably pull it up on Robert's Register because it was there, and read it. But we can do that and put it out. But again, the military is out of control. It's sort of like the Canadians. When we had Terry Reardon that died of DU poisoning, did the autopsy, confirmed everything. We tried to get everything done. The guy up there in Canada in charge of it, who I knew very well and worked with, totally denied everything, and he just cited the U.S. guys denying it and working directly with them because, I mean, we're all together, working together. So we got, at one time, we were all good guys, and then some of the guys became bad guys because they would sell their soul in order to keep killing and destroying without any accountability. And they asked me to clean it up, and, well, hey, I'm just going to finish that job. And the cost for me and everybody else and my team has been staggering.
I was watching your emails with Professor Boyle and the other members of your list. Anthrax was sent through the mail?
Yeah, isn't that wonderful? I mean, the U.S. Army said weaponize anthrax through the mail in packages. I mean, first off, it's ludicrous that it ever got out of the labs whatsoever because I've been to those labs up there and we've worked and taught NBC, and you're not supposed to even get so much as a fart in and out of there without signing for it. And yet they sent weaponized anthrax all over. I mean, I think it's over 60 or 65 locations all over the world now. And that's horrific because there are no emergency preparations in place for handling it. I mean, you know, the pharmaceuticals we put in place, we had to give the anthrax vaccine during Desert Storm because the U.S. Army, absolutely, same lab, sent the weaponized anthrax to Iraq prior to Desert Storm, forcing us to do everything. And then they shipped it all over the place. And now you got the same thing happening. And now you got this MERS virus, I mean, another biological warfare thing. And you got to stop and think and say, what is going on and who's in charge of the farm?
Has there been any official explanation on how the anthrax was sent out, weapons-grade anthrax, through the U.S. mail and every other mail carrier system that it went through in other nations around the world? Like, what's the explanation, Doug? How are they able to sweep it under the carpet so fast?
No accountability. It goes all the way up to the top. I mean, for example, when President Obama, he's from Illinois, he was U.S. Senator here, okay, and he was working. And the family of one of my guys that committed suicide confronted him on the campaign trail. And obviously he didn't know, wasn't involved, had no idea, wasn't around anything, all right? Mm-hmm. And so our U.S. representative said, Doug, we got to brief him. So we put everything together, and they had a secure congressional courier transfer to the president direct when he was a senator. And we worked with the staff and totally briefed him and everything. And I even met with him. And it didn't do any good, because the guys in charge are the guys that are running the show, and they're the bad guys. I mean, as long as we want to control some other nation, we're going to kill, destroy, and overthrow governments and contaminate air, water, soil, and we don't care what happens. And then we have this idea that all the U.S. military and the U.S. military themselves have the idea they're Superman and immune to all this stuff until they get sick. And the horrible part about this for me, and what happens daily, is they don't want to talk about or acknowledge it until they get sick. Once they get sick, they're beating down my door, they're beating down Denise Nichols' door, they were beating down Paul Lyons' door until he gave up and committed suicide, and all over the place. So, I mean, they don't want to know, they don't want to see until they crash. And when they crash, all of a sudden they want to help, and then sometimes it's too late.
You know, Doug, I watch the news. Well, I used to watch it a lot more than I do now because it totally depresses me. I'd rather watch the comedy channel. But, you know, when things happened in Ferguson, when things happened in Philadelphia, when things happened in Baltimore, boy, it was all over every news outlet going. And yet, I know the story about depleted uranium. I know the story that, your personal story, I know the story of so many others that are affected by depleted uranium and what its effects are, how long it lasts. And I figure, why can't somebody give this newsworthy topic the same attention that these other stories are getting? Please don't misunderstand me, Exo Nation. I understand that these stories need to be told, but so does the story about depleted uranium, Doug. It just boggles my mind.
Well, we did Dateline, we did Nightline, we did CBS. I was on with Dan Rather in the Evening News. That was a totally fascinating experience. He called me at my office when I was teaching at Jacksonville State and said, "Hey, Dan Rather, we want to come down to interview you." And I thought it was a joke and everything till Monday morning the truck showed up. And we did a live interview. They got the satellites and cameras all over the creation, so you're looking on the monitor and talking to each other. And we've done it over and over again, but it doesn't stick, and everybody goes on to the next thing 5 minutes later.
Yeah.
And there's no accountability, because the military and the casualties of the military and the health effects from all the environmental contamination from the U.S., Canadian, British, all the militaries is staggering. They don't have the money to clean it up, and they can't tell the American or Canadian public, hey, it's all friendly fire. We screwed you up. We knew we were going to do it, and then we abandoned you.
It makes it sound as if to the powers to be that soldiers are just replaceable, you know? That's it.
They are. I mean, if anybody doesn't believe that, I mean, when you go back and you go over and you find out all your medical records were ordered destroyed, and you got the documents confirming that, I mean, from them themselves, when your personnel records destroyed and they claim and say, well, you weren't there and you didn't do the work. I mean, I don't know how many times I've gone into a medical appointment and I was confronted and they said, you weren't the DU project director, you didn't do this work, you weren't there, you weren't in the Army. And I go, hello, here's the photographs, guys.
And yet nobody wants to do anything about this. Doug, how about you've got a presidential election coming up in 2016. Would it be any benefit to get this information out to those who are running for president so that they could use it as a bit of a catapult to get the attention of the public? Or do you really think that everyone in Washington and those who aspire to be in Washington or Ottawa just don't give a damn?
Bingo.
That is so sad.
I mean, when we got fed up, when we came back from Desert Storm, okay, first we had Bush 1, and then we started working with Clinton. I still got the internal phone numbers for the White House of the people I was working with on his staff, and we got fed up with them. So then we went to work with George Bush 2. And then right there on Veterans Day for 2000, just days after the election, I was a keynote speaker for the Veterans Day breakfast in the United States Senate. I mean, Adrian Cronauer, God bless him. I mean, incredible guy. I mean, Vietnam hero, all kinds of stuff. You know, they did a movie, Good Morning Vietnam. He introduced me, and I spoke for 25 minutes. 1/3 were pissed, 1/3 walked out, and 1/3 went to sleep.
They were pissed. Why were they pissed? Because you were telling the truth?
Bingo.
Whatever happened to the honor that used to go along with being a member of the military? You know, honor, pride, and nation. Whatever happened to that?
I don't know. It all disappeared a long time ago. I mean, when I first went to Vietnam, we all bought into that.
Yeah.
Everything. We bought into the Gulf of Tonkin incident. We know today none of it happened. And the Vietnam vet is still struggling today because as a Vietnam vet, we're trying to justify everything that happened in Vietnam, which you can't do. And therefore, the subconscious portion of the mind knows the truth and honesty, and integrity, and everything else. And the conscious mind wants to belong to the group where you live in it. Well, the same thing has happened today. The guys in the military want to belong to the group, and so they go along and do all this stuff until they get sick of a problem, and they know underneath in their deep mind it's a lie, and the subconscious and conscious mind struggles together, and so PTSD, it's a moral injury beyond comprehension, combined with incredible toxicological exposures that have torn everybody apart.
What are the soldiers saying who are getting ready to be deployed? Do they know the hazards that they're going to be facing? I mean,
no, they're not taught to this day.
I'm sorry?
They're still not taught. We put all the training programs together, and they're not taught. The mandated training is out there. They're not taught. They're not told. And then they're all the hoo-ha and yay-rah team of the John Wayne and Rambo. They think they're immune to everything. They're going to go over there and save the planet and the world, and they find out it's ludicrous. Sort of like they've been on the news right now, right before we came on, and they were talking about sending the 82nd Airborne back into Iraq to train the Iraqis. You got a bunch of high school kids that are barely literate themselves that don't speak Iraqi, and they're going to go in and train these military to do what? That doesn't even pass the smell test.
Let me ask you this, Doug. If the President of the United States was to call you up and say, Doug, I want you to be a special advisor to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They are going to follow your recommendations when it comes to depleted uranium. What course of action would you take, Doug?
It was real simple. This is what I told them, and I lost my job because of it. You can no longer use depleted uranium emissions because we can't clean up the environmental contamination, and we do not have medical care available to do anything. As the doctors told me yesterday, all we can do is optimize and stabilize, and that's all you can hope for. And then along with everything else, it's just real simple. If we send them to war, no matter whether it's a toxic exposure or a bullet or a bomb, we provide medical care to them, optimal medical care, without hesitation, without argument, and without forcing the soldier to prove that he was there when they know he was. It's simple. Do what's right. Do what's right under God, and quit contaminate air, water, and soil for nothing.
What about the people who are innocent casualties of war?
Oh, it's horrific. I mean, when you see the children or talk to the children or talk to the parents or see the spouse that's sick as a consequence thereof, or you see these spouses like in Paul's case, I mean, his children are sick and his wife is sick, and as he said in one of his last emails before he gave up and committed suicide, why won't they listen? Why don't they take care of me and my family? It's absolutely wrong. They knew what the problem was. They've always known. They knew what the solution was, and they just ignored it.
You know, everybody years ago saw Aaron Brockovich, you know, and they were astounded that major corporations could actually use chemicals that are dangerous to people and that people were getting sick. And for a little while, there was a bit of a buzz.
Hey, now we know what Alzheimer's is. Hello, bingo.
You know?
It's incredible chemical toxicity since the Better Living Through Chemistry started in the 60s, and the incubation period hit for all these toxic exposures, and now we got it. That's where Gulf War illness is. When you look at all the neurological, mental, other medical problems, they all match. And we had an acute exposure in the military versus a chronic exposure for the elderly. Hello, you can't live in a toxic environment.
And yet nobody's doing anything to change it, Doug. Besides you, Doug, and your crusaders that are out there, and all these years later, you guys haven't given up one bit. What can the people do? What can we, the people, do to help you and your other crusaders in your fight?
Hold all the legislators, all public officials totally accountable, whether it's a local legislature, that's got to take the responsibility, like in Rantoul, to force the Air Force to clean up their contamination. I mean, the legislators didn't create it. They're not responsible for cleaning it up. All they got to do is force accountability. And the same thing with the President of the United States. Yeah, he gave these guys authorization to do it, and then the guy in the military made the conscious choice to contaminate air, water, and soil, but now they got to clean it up. So what we need to have is a groundswell, and somebody, I don't remember who it was, maybe one of those said, we have to mobilize God's army to get God's army to force everything to change. Well, even though we've had 2 popes make the recommendation, nothing changed.
So what would it take? Would it just take President Obama to say, "All right, guys," or the Secretary of Defense, or the person in charge of the Veterans Administration? There seems to be a lot of bosses who have the capability of making the changes happen that need to change.
They just issued the order and say this is it, and if you don't want to go along with it, get out of here. But what they've done is they got all these people that have hurt everybody. They allow them to stay, and they give them bonuses and everything. Because in a sense, they're going back to what they were told to do before. Avoid all liability and don't acknowledge it and pay for it. Well, now the groundswell is getting there, like with the 800 number, forcing everybody to call and give them an 800 number to call, setting up the Airborne Hazards Registry saying we're going to give you medical care for it. We've had some success, but unless the info gets out and the soldiers call and force the accountability and everybody forces the legislators and the president all the way up and all the prime minister total accountability, it ain't going to happen.
There are times, every time you're on, Doug, and you and I talk about depleted uranium and PTSD, I get emails from people saying, well, what does this have to do with UFOs, government conspiracies, cover-ups? And I say, what do you mean, what does it have to do with a government cover-up? What do you mean, what does it have to do with conspiracy? What, just because we're not talking about aliens, UFOs, and the New World Order, the shadow government, that there can't be a real cover-up that we can say, here is the proof? Like, what is it? Homosexuality is out of the closet. Why can't we get this topic of depleted uranium that's in front of everybody's face out there? Make the changes.
Because it's real simple. It's an incredible weapon of war, and our purpose is to kill and destroy. And we're not going to give up any weapon. And you're not going to find anybody that's going to challenge the military establishment and say, wait, you got to stop using these weapons, stop killing and destroying. I was over in the Majoron in Athens, Greece for a conference some time ago, and I testified. And at that conference, they presented the Hague Peace Prize to a guy from Africa for all the work he had done on the children warriors and saving them.
Yeah.
And at the end of this thing, right after they gave it, all of a sudden this nun down sitting in the front row started singing. And then another one sang, and somebody else sang. And there were people in all the languages of the earth, at least 80 nations sitting there, along with all the Nobel laureates, and all of us were presenters, saying, let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me.
Yeah.
So it's possible, but how do we get that to where the leaders actually believe it and start doing it and live together and share the resources when all we want to do is steal, cheat, and lie?
What happens, Doug, the day that ISIS gets a hold of DU weapons?
They got it.
Really?
Yeah, they got tanks, they got everything, they got weapons. We shot the whole place up with DU munitions. You got all the radioactive weapons there and all the dirty bombs just laying there for the pick. And it was already on the news. The Australians had a conference on it the other day.
Do the people in ISIS realize the danger that they're playing with by using these weapons?
No. But they know all the health effects over there from the military operations, and that's why they're fed up with us intervening and occupying their nations.
Do you think that peace is possible?
As long as we keep intervening, no.
Is it possible, Doug, in your opinion, that there are some countries that cannot cope with our idea of democracy, that by trying to impose our ideas and systems of democracies that we're doing more harm than good?
Absolutely.
Wow.
I mean, most people in most areas, they just want food and water and live and be left alone.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to look at what the living standards in most of the third world. It's horrible. I mean, and all over a lot of places, they don't care about all this other stuff. I mean, it's all the economic thing, the Bilderbergs and everybody else, and the Committee of Trend, Trilateral, and all these guys that want to control everything and control the resources, and they don't care about sharing them with the people that need them anyhow. And then we contaminate the world with pesticides. I mean, out in California, Dr. Ann Lopez is reporting over and over again, the farm workers group out there, all the pesticide problems and all the farm workers that are harvesting our vegetables.
So basically, we're killing ourselves.
We've been doing it for a long time. Better living through chemistry. Isn't it wonderful?
Yeah. I've got to tell you something. This GMO food that they're putting out, I'm telling you, Doug, it doesn't taste like food anymore. We bought a watermelon. I used to love watermelons. You know that sweet taste, the little black seeds, and you can just get that crunch? Well, you don't get that anymore. What you get is blech. And
it's got to be how fast can you produce it, how big can you produce it, and how much it can produce, not at the normal rate that God intended.
Well, instead of shipping everything overseas, why don't we, this is, in my opinion, is another good reason why we need to bring industry, whether it's the agriculture industry, the fishing industry, or just manufacturing industry, back to the United States. I'd rather pay a little bit more knowing that the product that I'm buying was made in the USA or Canada instead of all these third world countries that we're subsidizing to kill us.
Yeah, I don't know. It's so strange. And between the United States and Canada, I mean, I grew up, my grandparents live on the Canadian border, Minnesota, North Dakota, and right straight south of Winnipeg. And so when we were up there, again, back at that time in the 50s and the 60s when we were growing up, you didn't know any difference. You didn't see anything. We'd be going up to Winnipeg, and we'd stop at the station. The guy running and said, hey, Milford, hey, Ray, can you bring some stuff back for me? And, okay, yeah, here's the money, bring it back, because they couldn't get up to Winnipeg to get it.
Yeah.
And you didn't see any difference between the two countries. And that was so different. But then in other areas, there definitely are distinctive differences and everything else. But there's still the fundamental bond. They're still the same. And the fundamental Judeo-ethic Christian ethics that we were raised with and we were brought up with and we believe in, that somehow has to turn this whole mess around.
What influence, or what was the intention of the popes getting involved? How did that proceed, Doug?
Well, several different ways. We had different things, and I went to 2 different conferences. We were asked to come over to Rome. This is some years ago. We were working on the Balkans, and Asa Durakovic and I were asked, and then we had another guy there, and that's Colonel Asa Durakovic, Army Colonel and the expert on this stuff, an actual MD. He's since been sent packing, and they destroyed his career in the Army and the VA.
Oh, jeez. And
we got called over there to Rome and everything else. Well, when we were there, we ended up meeting the Pope's emissary, and Father Jean-Marie Benjamin, and again, Benjamin for Iraq. And he asked us to set everything up and put a briefing together for the Pope, and that was John Paul, and we did it. And then several years ago, again, not the current Pope, but the one before, even though we briefed this current one now, the past one before, what we had is we went over to a conference in Geneva, Switzerland, and after I got done testifying and doing our conference, we had this panel discussion. they said up, well, Doug, we'd like to introduce you. This is Father Tomasi. And I said, thank you very much. And Father Tomasi said, Doug, you're from Thomasboro, and all you go, St. Elizabeth, you're a priest, and this, you guys, I want you to put a briefing together for the Pope and everything else, Benjamin. And we, okay, and brought it back here, and my priest was jumping through the hoops, and the bishop is jumping through the hoops, and kind of like, whoa, you guys are doing what for who? Yeah, he gave us the thing and told us to do it. And they came back with incredible support. But it doesn't make any difference because nobody's listening. The people responsible for war are not listening. It's money. It's power. It's greed. It's control.
But by their greed for control and more money, it's their responsibility, in my opinion, to take care of those who have gone over to the different theaters, who have put their lives in harm's way, who have, made the ultimate sacrifice, defending these people who are greedy and who want control. And by them not doing that, they're as guilty as anyone else, and they should and must be held accountable. But how do we hold them accountable, Doug? What's the way that we have to get to them?
We've had all kinds of hearings and everything else. Ramsey Clark and the world courts have done everything. We've been with the United Nations. We've done it in Congress and House. I've been to the British House of Commons and House of Lords. So far, we haven't had any luck.
What's the comeback?
Because everybody follows the lead of the U.S. military and the Department of Defense, who put out the orders to lie, cheat, and steal and avoid responsibility to allow us to use this to kill and destroy. Comes down to Los Alamos memo. It's been operational since day one.
How about the families of those who are returning home with PTSD or suffering from depleted uranium? Are they getting any help, or are they just getting the same lack of attention that everyone else is getting?
They're dumped. I mean, every day I go up and work with spouses and everything. You got the sick vet, and the wife or the husband of the sick vet is looking for help or trying to understand it and trying to get help themselves, and then they're sick or something, and they can't deal with it, and it's just a catastrophic mess. It snowballs to heck, and then next thing you know, you got a suicide because the vet is so sick and can't get the care. They can't take care of their families. The families can't take care of them. They don't know what to do. They've asked for help, and they've been abandoned. And then the next thing you know, they give up.
Exonation, my guest this hour is Major Doug ROKKE. We're talking about depleted uranium and the effects of depleted uranium, not only on the military, but on you, upon me, upon our children. And Doug, what's the lifespan of depleted uranium?
About 4.5 billion years.
So it's not a problem that's going to be swept under the carpet.
Yeah, it's kind of irrelevant. What is our lifespan? Maybe 70 years?
If we're lucky. If we're lucky. I would have imagined...
Too many of these kids that are giving up and dying in their 20s and their 30s and their 40s, they were extraordinarily healthy and could run all day and leap tall buildings at a single bound, and they come back contaminated, and they're dying young. We just had the vice president's son. When I talked to friends at SecDef office, they're totally confirmed. Vice president's son died from exposures in Iraq. Hello. It's listed in the stuff I gave you already.
Yeah. And the official cause of death was a brain cancer?
Yeah, brain tumor.
Brain tumor.
But that's confirmed as a primary consequence of all the toxic exposures in the Airborne Hazard Registry and all the other stuff.
Do you think Vice President Biden is aware that this was a result of his son being in the service and being exposed to these agents?
Sure.
And still,
how else? That's probably what it is because hey, were you exposed? Yes. Did you have this? Yes. Hello.
And yet nothing is still being done.
Why would it?
In my book, Doug, and I know in your book, people aren't, you just don't throw people away.
Yeah, and too many do. When I call individuals and ask them for help, or I send them an email or send them a letter, their primary response is they don't respond. They don't call you back. They don't talk to you. They don't acknowledge that you even said anything. And then they hope they can keep it out of the newspaper and off of TV wherever they live, and they are very successful at that. I mean, that's what's happening in Jefferson Proving Ground, Indiana. That's happening right here with the contamination at Chinook Air Force Base in Rantoul. I mean, the news reporter, deputy editor, was going to report it, got fired when he reported it. And they kept it out of TV and radio and out of the newspapers. I mean, internationally you'll find the stories, and you can find it if you look on the Internet, but you're not going to find anything locally. And that's all over the world. That's all over the nation whenever it's totally contaminated and the mess is made and there's some need for accountability.
When you were mandated to clean up the mess in the first Gulf War, what did you actually accomplish?
What we did is we identified all the contaminated and destroyed Abrams and Bradley fighting vehicles. Mm-hmm. We're told not to help the British and not to identify those to secure any of those. We isolated and secured some of the Iraqi equipment that had been brought back that was contaminated, again, they wanted to bring back for trophies and all this other stuff, and we got rid of that and buried that. So what we did is we shipped back all the Abrams tanks back to the Defense Nuclear Facility down in Barnwell, South Carolina, all the Abrams and Bradleys, and it took years to get those cleaned up and buried. And then we buried a whole bunch of destroyed Bradleys with body parts and everything else we couldn't remove over in the desert in Iraq, Saudi Arabia. Mm-hmm. And basically what we were able to do from that is get the mess cleaned up. Now, even though I ordered medical care immediately and they hung medals all over for me and we did all this stuff forever, Shinseki personally signed the orders based on medical care for everybody. Shinseki personally signed the regulations I wrote for him. All of it is still totally ignored. Training is required. They don't train anybody. The Canadians were totally involved. The Canadians joined on when we did AR 700-48. Then they wrote their own manual, which is a mirror image of that, but they wrote it simultaneously on the pages in French and English. And it's not there, and nobody cares.
I think a lot of people care, but they are the people that can't make the difference, Doug.
That's what I found, too.
Yeah.
And then the vet is still bought into the nightmare until he crashes and burns, and then they're screaming for help. I've been chased across the Danville VA so many times where people have chased me into an appointment and disrupt my appointment for me to try and help them get care. I had a vet on crutches, and his wife was on crutches, both contaminated, both exposed. She got cross-contaminated and brought back with the contamination. They literally chased me across the VA and found out what appointment I was in and broke in to ask me and the doctor for help.
Unreal. I truly thought, Doug, that with the big shakeup that happened in the VA not that long ago, it would be better for you. It would be better for the soldiers who are coming back. It would be better for the families that need the help. But I see nothing's changed.
Not really. I mean, it is changing in some, and we're getting commitment in some, and we're getting help from some, but that's an individual thing where we got to get the information to them. Sharing the information, just the stuff that I sent you in preparation for the program and all the other stuff we shared over the years, is key. If the vet doesn't have the information and the military doesn't tell them, they can't share it. If the VA, no matter where they are here in the United States, in England or in British or in England or Australia, it doesn't matter where they're at, if they don't share the information they know, they can't get the care. When you go to an appointment and the doctor believes that it didn't happen, there were no exposures, which the Dr. Perry did at the Danville VA told me, you're sunk. I mean, it all comes down to it. Tell the truth, share the information, get the education out. Right now, the big push, Denise Nichols met with the senior leaders, and a whole bunch of our team met with senior leaders in the VA in Washington a few weeks ago, and they put out a memo saying we're going to do this now, which was incredible. Whether they follow through, we don't know yet, because it's only been a couple, 2-3 weeks.
Right.
But they have to do continuing medical education, totally inform them, give them the information, give them the stuff that we know about providing the care to everybody, and then they just do it. It's real simple. Just do it without any more argument, hesitation, or discussion.
So vets are coming back with a double-barrel dose of problems. Number one, they're coming back with depleted uranium, and number two,
and the chemical exposures.
Right, and the chemical exposures.
Everything.
And as well as PTSD. God bless them.
The PTSD is horrific, but a lot of these kids, and Ray Clark, who wrote The Never Ending War, and he's been on my show when we've been working together, he's on the response force at Camp Lejeune. Mm-hmm. He wrote the textbook on PTSD for Vietnam, The Never Ending War. And what he has found out is so many of these military are coming from broken families, so they have PTSD before they get in the military.
Oh, wow.
Areas enlisting, I don't know how to, they're second-class, third-class people that have given off with hard education or any support system. So they got PTSD before they go to the military. Then they come back, and God almighty, what they got is staggering. So Ray reports what they're reporting to him. They feel like they're living in the walls.
Is there any way that these soldiers or these recruits can be tested for PTSD using a psychological profile that would actually weed them out before they're given that double exposure of hell?
I don't think so.
No,
It's a moral injury. It's not measurable. It's a toxic exposure. It's not measurable. I mean, everybody's got this idea somehow we're going to do something ahead of time. They got all these programs they put in place, and they talk about prevention, and none of it's worked. They keep giving people drugs and medication, all the psychotic and drugs and everything else, and all it does is dumb the person down. It doesn't solve anything. And then the kid goes and uses street drugs, and he drowns himself in alcohol to forget the story, and the next thing you know, you got crash and child and spouse abuse all over, and then medical complications, and then they suicide.
And everybody else is left to clean up the mess.
Yeah, well, I'm tired of cleaning up the mess, and Paul Lyons kept cleaning it up and asking it, and he finally gave up the ghost because he couldn't even get care.
How is Denise doing, Doug?
And I talked to her earlier, but she's still struggling. She's still doing everything she can. I mean, she's a true nurse. I mean, one of the most incredible nurses I've ever met. I mean, she actually saved my life. I mean, from when we got sick, we were in the military together. And the number of lives and differences she continues to make. I mean, she was the one that forced this stuff to come out with a memo saying give the medical care and get rid of the war injuries clinic. She went in and met with the secretary staff, McDonald's staff, and forced it on out. I mean, she keeps trying, but all these people, you got to remember, all of us are sick too. We're all disabled. We're all crashing and burning. We can only go so long without help and without commitment because, you know, like Don Quixote.
Doug, who's going to carry the torch when you no longer can?
I don't know. Got to find somebody to volunteer. I mean, you know, everybody that's carrying the torch is not a young puppy anymore. Yeah. And the people that are, I mean, Andres is gone. You know, I mean, you know, all these guys are gone. Tom is gone. Jim is gone. All these guys that got exposed and tried to get it out, they're all dead now because they were denied medical care and they died from their exposures. And they were leading the charge.
What are some of the best websites that my listeners can go and visit to get more information on depleted uranium and the death sentence?
Well, I mean, you got the Beyond Treason website with Joyce Riley. Again, incredible Joyce Riley, who herself is, you know, going down for the count. She was an Air Force flight nurse, medevac nurse, and she did the video Beyond Treason. Gary Knoll has done incredible work with his documentaries, Killing Our Own. Mm-hmm. You got those websites. You got still grassrootspeace.org. That's the old website, Trap Rock, that Sonny Miller and Cheryl Jinks put together. You know, but you're not going to find it on any of the veterans organizations or the military, the VA. You're not going to find it. They don't want to tell anybody or share the resources, share the information, because then they're accountable.
And all it would take is an executive order saying, "Fix it."
Bingo.
But like you said, the war machine and the industrialists like the money it brings, and there are other people who like the power that depleted uranium munitions wield. It's a sad world, my friend.
Back to that old song. I mean, if everybody finds out what the actual true health and environmental effects of war are, nobody's going to come. So we're back to the thing. Hey, what if they gave a war and nobody came? Jesus, we'll have peace.
Now, isn't that a strange idea? Have peace, no war. Well, The hippies tried it, make love not war, and that kind of lasted a little while. And yet we haven't learned. We haven't learned, Doug. We haven't learned through Vietnam. We haven't learned through Gulf War I, II, Afghanistan, and the list goes on and on. All I can do, Doug, is offer you and the wonderful people that you work with a venue to try and get the message out. You know that I'm here for you guys. Anytime, let me know. We'll get you on. But take care of yourself, Doug ROKKE. You're a good man.
Well, hey, wait, I told you a story before, and we're going to tie this with the UFOs. I was in a B-52 flying over the Indian Ocean, and we had a UFO come alongside of it. It was in the official reports. It happened.
Wow.
We were flying at 550 miles an hour. He came up, stopped right alongside it, flew us on us, and took off and left us like we were sitting still.
Hey, Doug, we're going to have to talk about that another time because I'm nearly out of time. Doug ROKKE, thanks very much for joining us, my friend. Take care of yourself and give my love to all.
Thank you, Rob.
Take care, friend. And that's it for tonight, Exo Nation. I'll be back tomorrow night at 8 o'clock as once again we cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X Zone. So until tomorrow night, always keep your eyes to the sky and your heart to the light and tell everyone to listen to Starcom Radio Network. Good night now.